By a show of hands, how many of you guys watching picked up Gold and Silver as your first game? Better yet, how many of you watching hold Gold and Silver as pinnacle of Pokemon? If you raise your hand, well, congrats. Put it down because I can't even see it. But if you did raise your hand, then it's safe to say that you've been playing Pokemon a long time like I have. And while many of us started with Red and Blue, it's really Gold and Silver that cemented that love. So, welcome to my Pokemon Retrospective. And let's talk Generation 2 OG Gold and Silver. Now, I'm going to be honest, I wrote an entire script talking about Pokemon Gold and Silver Generation 2 and everything that went into it, but we're just going to toss that out the window. And the reason why we're going to do that is because when we're talking about old games such as these and retro games such as these, it's fun to go into the history of it, but it's more fun to talk about how it impacted you as a gamer and how it impacted you as a fan of the franchise. I mean, there's a reason why we're still playing Pokemon till these days. There's a reason why I am still playing Pokemon all these years later. And I mean, I have Charmander on my desk. I have a Pikachu Pokemon case sitting on my desk. I have Pikachu controllers. I have Pokemon cards all over the place. Like, there's a reason why this franchise has been around as long as it has. And while Red and Blue started the craze, it wasn't until Gold and Silver that really cemented things for the Pokemon Company and for us as fans. I mean, just look at the games in general. A lot of the core aspects of Pokemon that are still in the game these days started with Gold and Silver. If you don't know what I'm talking about, you might not be a competitive player, but a lot of competitive players, the things that they focus on started in Generation 2. So let's take a look at Pokemon and how it's evolved from Generation 2, what Generation 2 did for the future of this franchise, and why Generation 2 is still my favorite generation to this day, even though I started with Red and Blue. To start with, let's talk about the gameplay. The gameplay is relatively the same as Red and Blue, and if you want to go into a little bit more depth on stuff, you can go ahead and check out my Red and Blue retrospective, which will be somewhere at the end of the video, probably over here on this side. And while the gameplay hasn't changed between Red and Blue and Gold and Silver, and honestly, any other game beyond that, except for maybe the side games like Pokemon Legends Arceus, which even that, at its core, still has the same turn-based aspect, still has the rock, paper, scissors aspect. Gold and Silver, it's still Red and Blue, but with added elements to it. And while the main story is still gotta catch them all, while it's still go to the Elite Four and battle all the trainers, get the badges, and become the champion, there is so much more within these games that wasn't present in Red and Blue, and to be honest, isn't present in any other game after. Of course, I'm talking about the fact that in Red and Blue, it was just Kanto, but in Gold and Silver, it's Johto and Kanto. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why Gold and Silver is my favorite generation. Because if it wasn't for the ability to journey back to Kanto after you finish Johto, if it wasn't for that, and if it wasn't for the continuing story, because honestly, most Pokemon game stories are pretty self-contained, right? So you have Pokemon, I was going to say Omega, but if you get Pokemon Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, their story is self-contained because they don't relate to Red, Blue, Gold, Silver, Black, White, any of the other generations. But Gold and Silver does. Gold and Silver continues the story from where Red and Blue left off. While Red and Blue, the main villain or antagonist was Giovanni and Team Rocket, Gold and Silver continues that by now not only introducing a new generation, but introducing new characters, as this game takes place 2 years after Red and Blue, and we are introduced to somebody who we assume is Giovanni's son. Giovanni also makes a return in this game, so does Team Rocket. But it's a defunct Team Rocket with presumably Jesse and James being the leader if you've played the remakes. But we're not here to talk about the remakes. We're talking about the originals. In Gold and Silver, you're allowed to transfer your Pokemon from Red and Blue over to Gold and Silver, but you cannot transfer backwards, obviously, because there's new Pokemon, so you can't take a Cyndaquil and send it to Red and Blue, although that would have been really cool. And just like Red and Blue, Gold and Silver introduces new legendary Pokemon, such as Celebi, who is still one of my favorite legendaries, as well as Ho-Oh and Lugia, which are the two main Pokemon that you see on the covers. Similar to how Charizard and Blastoise were the red and blue, Ho-Oh is the gold and Lugia is the silver. Now it's kind of deceptive a little bit as far as Lugia goes, because Ho-Oh being fire flying, you would think Lugia would be water flying, but no, Lugia is instead our first psychic flying type, or I should say our first legendary psychic flying type, because with Gold and Silver we are introduced to other types of Pokemon. We have other flying psychics in the form of Noctowl. We have a brand new or two brand new typings, I should say, within Steel and Dark. And these typings throw a wrench into a lot of different gameplay styles, because Steel being immune to poison, Dark being immune to Psychic and super effective against Psychic, while being simultaneously weak to fighting and Bug. It adds for interesting gameplay. We have new evolutions with Espeon and Umbreon. Umbreon is still beast mode, but who doesn't love Umbreon? Who doesn't love evolutions? Still waiting for a dragon evolution, but hey, or a ghost. I have ideas for the ghost ones, but anyways, we're not talking about that. Gold and Silver does a lot for the franchise moving forward. If you're not a competitive player, you're going to learn right now why I say this. Competitively speaking, when you're raising Pokemon and you're trying to find the best of the best, you rely on breeding. You rely on breeding because you want to get the best IVs possible. Now, IVs in Pokemon games, those are value points that are assigned to your Pokemon, which allows them to grow their stats at specific paces. And the higher their IVs in the specific stat, the better their stats will be within that stat. Having Pokemon with maxed out IVs is ideal, but generally not something that you typically see all the time. And that's okay too. Because as competitive players, if you have a Pokemon that is more reliant on special attack, you're not going to try and force your Pokemon to have high attack for IVs. And the reason why this is important is because that extra point in a special attack or defense or attack or HP or speed can make the difference between winning a battle and losing a battle. Gold and Silver also introduced EVs. I know this is a lot of things I'm throwing at you with IVs and EVs and EV, but EVs are effort values that your Pokemon gain from fighting other Pokemon. Now, effort values are used to be able to increase your Pokemon's stats for specific stats up to a maximum amount. Now, in order to gain these value points, you have to fight certain Pokemon. A certain Pokemon will give you those effort value points that help your Pokemon to level up. It becomes very tedious, I will admit, and later games do this a lot better as far as bringing up their effort value points. But the fact that it started in this generation was massive. Also, attack, which was the way that you bring up the stat in Red and Blue, is now been split into two different categories. You have special attack and special defense. Simultaneously, defense is also special defense and regular defense. Regular attack is your physical type of move. Special attack, special moves, such as flamethrower. Defense, physical defense. Special defense, defense against special moves. You see where I'm going with this? It's very easy to understand. I think it is anyways. These are all things that were introduced in this generation that carries on to generations even today, because this added to the competitive aspect of the game. And it all started with breeding. Breeding your Pokemon, to me, is probably one of the more fun things about Pokemon. I don't know why, because it's so tedious, it's so mundane, but breeding Pokemon over and over to get specific Pokemon, to me, that just, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's like an OCD thing, even though I don't suffer from OCD, but maybe it is. To be able to just breed over and over to get that Pokemon perfect to how you want it to be. That's something that I still do in these games. Gold and Silver also introduced shiny Pokemon. And the way that they introduced it was probably the best way they could have, with the Red Gyarados. Red Gyarados was pretty much everybody's first introduction to a shiny Pokemon. And the way that they did it within this game was that the Gyarados got so mad, it turned red. And it got that way because of the waves that Team Rocket was putting out to forcibly evolve Pokemon. And because this Gyarados was forced to evolve, it became angry and evolved into this red Gyarados, which was a shiny Gyarados. And you can't tell me that you guys watching this video didn't constantly have this red Gyarados within your party, because I know I did. To see a Pokemon in a completely different color for the very first time, and to be honest, this was the first game that was in color for Pokemon. It was amazing. It was something new. And it added more to that breeding effect, because now, not only do we breed for the perfect Pokemon, but now we breed for shiny Pokemon, because breeding actually makes it easier to get those shiny Pokemon instead of encountering them in the wild. Although later games make it easier to encounter them in the wild, but we will get there when we get there to later games. Gold and Silver, not only the fact that it continues off of the story from Red and Blue, but also allowing you to go to Kanto, allows you to see the effects after the first game. What I mean by this is we can go and challenge all the gym leaders in Kanto after completing Johto. And in doing so, we get to see older versions of the characters that we know from Kanto and the first generation, as well as know them from the Pokemon series. Seeing Brock and Misty older, seeing Koga's daughter being the leader of the gym, and now Koga is part of the Elite Four. Seeing Lance take back his title as champion, only then to find out that Red is waiting for us at the top of Mount Silver. All of this it's mind-blowing. All of this within a Game Boy cartridge. This game that we fell in love with in Red and Blue has now doubled in size in our minds, because now we explore two different places. One new, one familiar. But yet this familiar place is different. Because if we go and we try to find the places that we once explored before, only to then find them drastically changed or inaccessible, it's mind-blowing, to say the least. Going to Cinnabar Island only to find out that the volcano erupted and Cinnabar Island is a mere shadow of its former self. Or going to the power plant in hopes of catching Zapdos only to find out that you can't access it. Or trying to go to Cerulean Cave to maybe get Mewtwo because hopefully Red didn't canonically catch him, only to find out that they've blocked off the cave because it's too dangerous. Makes me wonder what happened to all those Pokemon within that cave. Are they now starving to death, or did they evolve into something different to survive within the cave off of the resources in that cave? Makes you wonder. Encountering things that you wouldn't have expected to encounter before in different routes, in different areas. It all just adds to the wonderment that is this game. And all at the same time, I don't know about you guys, but the animated show, or the the anime, I don't know why I said the animated show, my brain is not working right now, but all the while the anime is following along this game because we have caught up, not really caught up, but we are now in the Johto region in the anime as well, with one of the best intros ever that I still have playing in my head. You know which one I'm talking about. Come on. Pokemon Johto. Do-do-do-do-do. Everybody wants to be a master. Everybody wants to show their skills. Everybody wants to get there faster. Make the way to the top of the hill. Each time you try, it's going to get just a little bit better. Each step you climb, one more step up the ladder. You know the song. I know the song. And now you're going to go to Spotify and listen to the song because now you're going to be like, man, I can't get it out of my head, so now I got to listen to it. Cause it's a whole new world we live in. It's a whole new way to see. It's a whole new world we live in. But you still gotta catch 'em all and be the best that you can. Pokémon Johto. Pokémon Johto. This generation is my favorite generation. They added so much depth to these games. And as I mentioned before, Pokemon Red and Blue started the franchise, started the craze, but Gold and Silver cemented it. I don't think that Nintendo and the Pokemon Company really understood what they had until Gold and Silver released. And when I say release, I'm talking about worldwide release. I'm not talking about the actual release, because these games actually released earlier than what we got them. While Red and Blue released in 95 and we got it, I think it was 97 or 98. And then Gold and Silver had already been out in Japan and we got Gold and Silver in 2000. It was an odd time when you really think about it, because these days games get simultaneous worldwide releases. I can't speak today. And if they don't get a simultaneous release, then it's maybe a couple days apart. Very rare do you see games where it's a few months or a year apart. Persona, I'm looking at you because for some weird reason, Persona games still do that. Musically speaking, the game's pretty much the same as Red and Blue. There's a couple new tracks in here, but overall, it's the same stuff we remember, which honestly is fine because it hadn't been that long in between of Red and Blue and Gold and Silver, all things considered. Either way, when both games released, I was in middle school, so it doesn't really matter. And after Red and Blue, though, I wasn't sure if I initially wanted to get Gold and Silver because I felt like maybe I was too old for these games. But when I got my Gold, I was in love with this game in the same way that I was in love with my Red and Blue. Or my Pokemon Red. I didn't have Blue, my friends had Blue. Just like I had Gold, my friends had Silver. And in the same way, we traded all our Pokemon. I remember going to the movies and watching Pokemon 2000 because that was the big movie at the time. Yeah, you had Mewtwo Strikes Back, which was the first movie, but Pokemon 2000, you went to go watch Pokemon 2000, and when you went to go see it, they gave you an Ancient Mew card, which I still have. And during this time, I remember going into the malls and participating in the Pokemon events that they had, battling other people in the mall with my gold, and trading people and all of this stuff. This was a very different time than what we have these days. And honestly, I prefer it back then. Call me hungry for nostalgia, but it was one of those things where you had to interact with people. And just like how Ash felt with Butterfree when he traded his Butterfree for Eradicate, and then he kind of like felt bad for doing so, and he wanted to trade back. That's kind of how you felt back then, because you saw the trainer that you were trading the Pokemon to, and then you're wondering, is my Pokemon going to be taken care of? Are they going to treat my Pokemon the same way that I treated it? At the end of the day, it's a video game, but that's how we felt. That's how a lot of us felt anyways. And these days with Pokemon games, I don't feel that way. I'll trade a Pokemon and I don't care. Even if I've raised the Pokemon, even if I took the time to train it up and stuff, I can trade it no problem. And that's because I'm just randomly trading it online. I don't really have the face-to-face interaction with anybody when I'm trading Pokemon. And it makes it different. It makes it feel different. Again, maybe that's just me hungry for nostalgia. But I have a feeling a lot of you guys are hungry for nostalgia if you're watching this video and you're listening to me talk about Pokemon, specifically Generation 2, which at this point is almost 25 years old, or I think it's older than 25 years. It's been a long time. It's been a long journey. I grew up watching Ash. My kids have grown up watching Ash. My kids play the Pokemon games. Granted, they play the newer ones, but they still play them. I get to talk about my favorite Pokemon with my kids. And honestly, I get to talk about Pokemon with you guys. And talk about what my favorite Pokemon are. You guys get to tell me which ones are your favorites, what's your favorite gym leader, your favorite moments in the games. And since we're on the subject of favorite Pokemon, I mean, from Generation 2, my favorite Pokemon is Cyndaquil and Celebi. Those are my two favorites. Something about Cyndaquil, a cute little freaking anteater thing. I'm not a fan of Typhlosion, though, which is kind of weird. But I love Cyndaquil. Cyndaquil it's just super cute. I don't know. I never wanted it to grow up, but kind of just had to. Which I was kind of glad. Side note, I was kind of glad that Pokemon Legends Arceus lets you pick Cyndaquil as your first Pokemon. Oh, man. And then you get a Hisuian Typhlosion that really kind of looks dopey. But still, it looked kind of cool in a drugged out kind of way, I guess. But all to say that these games really cemented where Pokemon is now. Without Gold and Silver, I don't think Pokemon would be as big of a giant as it is. Because I do firmly believe that Red and Blue, while it did start everything, Gold and Silver made it what it is. They introduced so many things, such as berries, such as making new Pokeballs using acorns at that time. Like I mentioned, the breeding system. While there was a daycare in Red and Blue, it didn't do the breeding that you saw in Gold and Silver. The only thing that's missing for me in modern Pokemon games these days is the ability to go back to previous generations or areas and battling the old gym leaders and running into things. Makes me wish that one day they would release an MMO where you get to pick your region that you want to start in. Although if they did, I would never leave my house, and that would not be good because I need to work. But at that moment, or at this moment, I would like to thank you guys for watching this video and going down this nostalgic journey with me. Because Gold and Silver, I think, will always be my favorite generation. And I want to thank you for watching this retrospective. Until next time. That's it. Just until next time.